So a pen a lot of you have been asking me to review for quite a long time now is this. This is the Jinhao 159, and I'm actually amazed I've gone so long without actually going ahead and buying one of these pens, because this pen here is actually pretty common. You can pick it up on eBay and Alibaba, and it's actually one of the first results you will get if you type in Chinese fountain pen, and these pens have been on the market for a very, very long time. They were on the market when I first got into using fountain pens. I found reviews of these that are at least 8 years old. These pens have been around for a very long time, and I gotta say, these pens are actually pretty good, and I guess that's the reason why a lot of you want me to review this pen. And obviously the elephant in the room, the other big reason why people would want me to review this pen is the looks and the name. This pen here obviously is meant to look like this pen here. This is the Jinhao and this is the Montblanc, and obviously this pen looks very, very similar to the Montblanc. This pen here is obviously styled to look like a 149, and this is a 146, so it's slightly different, though just putting them next to each other, you can tell where they were going, what they were trying to do. And as well as that, 149, 159, you sorta know what they were getting at. And the thing is, for this pen, I really don't mind all that much because it is, at the end of the day, just a generic looking cigar-shaped fountain pen, but just calling it a 159, you sort of know they were really pushing the boundaries right there. And what a lot of people like to do when they receive this pen is they like to go ahead and compare this pen to the Montblanc, and honestly, I don't think that's... well, you're not going to find out anything, because, you know, $5 pen versus a $1,000 pen, I think you know what I'm going to say. This pen here, the Montblanc, is much better than this pen. This pen has an 14 karat gold nib, this one has stainless steel. This pen here is obviously much better. I don't think me saying that for 10 minutes is going to be all that helpful. And honestly, I think a much better comparison that people tend to miss is actually comparing this pen here to other Chinese fountain pens, because I think this pen is the biggest competition for these two pens, the Jinhao X450 and Jinhao X750. And I think if you're actually in the market for looking for these pens, I think the 159 is actually a really good option to look at. And I'll get into that in the review. But first of all, let's talk about the specs of this fountain pen, because the first thing you're going to say upon picking this pen up is A, this is a very big fountain pen, and it's also a very heavy fountain pen, and I think that's one of the things that this pen has going for it, because for $5, I don't think you're going to get a heavier or bigger fountain pen for this type of money. So capped, this fountain pen is 148mm long, uncapped it's 124mm long, and posted it's 163mm long. In terms of the weight, this is a very heavy fountain pen at 49 grams, and unposted it is 31 grams. This is a very, very heavy pen, and in terms of the diameter, the smallest bit of the section is 12mm in diameter, and back here at the maximum bit, it's 16mm in diameter. So this is just a huge fountain pen. It is much thicker than the Jinhao X450, and these pens are pretty thick in their own right. I think these pens are about 10mm at the front of the grip and about 13mm back here. So this pen, there's no competition. This is a much bigger fountain pen than that. And for a lot of people, it's really, really comfortable. Me including, I don't mind large grips, but this thing here is just absolutely huge. I think this is very, very comfortable. Though the one thing that I will knock it back on is the fact that the grip isn't all that long in length. You know, it's about 1.5 centimeters. It's about the same size as the Jinhao X450, and I've had this complaint about the Jinhaos. I always wish the grips were a little bit longer, but the thing with this pen is, because it is a screw cap design, there it is, because it is a screw cap design, you will have the issue with the step down, and there is a little bit of the step down with the threads. You know, you're going to have that with this pen, and I think it's something that Jinhao could have improved on, though once you do get used to it, you know, it's not that big of an issue, but I'll point it out. In terms of the length, uncapped, it's 148mm, which is the same as a Montblanc 149, and it's not as big as I was expecting, though I gotta say, for most people, I think you're gonna be able to use this unposted. It's a very good pen, though if you do want to post it for the extra length and obviously the weight, because that is a very heavy pen, I think this is going to be big enough for pretty much everyone. There's a little bit of a step for the posting, but it's very nice. Though one thing that I will say is it's not the most secure post ever. If you do wobble it a little bit, it does sort of wobble off, so you really do have to push the cap on for it to be secure, and after a while there is going to be a faint line where you do cap this pen, but at the end of the day, this is a $5 pen. It is a workhorse, and this pen really is something that can stand up to being, tossed around. Honestly, for $5, I don't think most people are going to be terribly worried about it getting scratched. And I've got to say, this is, it is very, very durable. I've used this pen for the past 2.5 months, most days, and while there are a few scratches, it's held up very well like pretty much every other Jinhao. Jinhao used some very nice plastic in these pens, and while they do have some micro scratches, they can handle pretty much anything. The pen also has metal threads and a metal insert, so you can apply a fair amount of force on these threads and nothing is going to break them. These pens are very, very good as workhorse pens, and that's what you're going to do. That's what you'd expect for $5. Now, obviously, unlike the Montblanc pen, this pen, while it does have a band back here, it's not a piston filler fountain pen. Obviously, this pen is going to have a cartridge converter, and it's your standard Jinhao cartridge converter. These hold about 0.8 of a mil of ink, and while some people say, they're a little bit unreliable, they have a tendency to break, or they're crap, or they leak, I gotta say, these come free with the fountain pen, and I've only ever had 1 or 2 break on me. These are very nice converters, and I'm happy they give them to me for free. Alright, let's talk about the nib of this fountain pen, and one thing that I will say about this nib, and something that a lot of people tend to skip when they compare this pen to a Montblanc 149, is this pen here uses the standard Jinhao number 6 size nib, though the Montblanc 149 uses a number 9 size nib. So really, when you do look at this pen, you see the big body and you see such a small, well, it is a pretty big nib, but you see a disproportionately sized nib. It is always a little bit weird because it makes the nib look just a little bit out of place. But even that said, I'm glad they used this nib in it, because I really do like the Jinhao number 6 size nib. They've slowly gotten better over the years, and the ones they use nowadays are pretty good. They've obviously gotten a manufacturing process that, while it doesn't make, $1,000 worthy nibs, these nibs are pretty reliable and they're very nice. This one here, out of the box, wasn't scratchy at all. I've had no problems with it. Obviously, it has the characteristics of, regular Jinhaos, so obviously you're not going to get all that much flex from this nib, and it's pretty stiff. You probably can squeeze some line variation out of it if you really want to, but for the most part, just don't bother pressing down all that hard. You're going to get a very nice line. In terms of reliability, this pen for the most part is reliable. The only issue that I have with these pens, especially Jinhao number 6 size nibs, is sometimes they will dry start, and this will happen if you don't use them for a while, and the easy fix for them is just to take apart the pen, flick the converter if the ink is pulled up back here, and you just twist the converter maybe half a turn, a quarter of a turn, and that usually fixes it. And after that, it will write very reliably. And I know, I've written with these Jinhao nibs for years. I've done a lot of homework in them, a lot of projects and assignments, and I've done a few exams using these nibs, and these nibs are very nice to write with. They're obviously not $1,000 worthy nibs. You're not going to be fooling anyone if you try to sign a If you give it to them to sign a document, it's not going to fool anyone, but these nibs are nice and they write. Though the cool things about these number 6 size nibs is if you do want to swap out a nib for another standard number 6 size nib, you can easily do that, and these pens are very, very accommodating. One example that I have done for the Jinhao X450 is I have gone ahead and swapped out the Jinhao nib for a Zebra G nib. You get crazy flex with this nib, and it's very, very easy to do with these Jinhao nibs. Alright, welcome to the writing sample for the Jinhao. This is the 159, and the nib is either a fine or medium. Honestly, it's up in the air with these Chinese fountain pens. They never really list it, and it always changes depending on the eBay listing. So it's a fine/medium nib. The ink that I'm using is Robert Oster Australian Sky Blue. And honestly, I don't care if people don't love this ink as much as I do. I really do love this ink, and I'm probably going to be out of this ink by the end of the year. I just use it, I don't know, I use it all the time. I really do enjoy using this ink. Anyway, let's get into a writing sample. And as you can see from that writing sample, there were pretty much no issues whatsoever. This pen writes, and it writes really well. I'm pretty sure just because I only refilled it a few minutes ago, there was no skipping, but honestly, once the pen goes, it just goes forever. Really, really nicely. As you can see, there was a little bit of scratch, and, you know, it's a Chinese pen. There's a little bit of scratch in them, but in writing, you can certainly hear it, but you really don't notice it when you're writing it, and a little bit of scratch is acceptable. In terms of shading, there's actually some nice shading in this pen. This pen is actually a little bit more wet than most other Jinhao number 6 size nibs that I've used, and you can certainly get some nice shading from the inks that you use. In terms of fast writing, and as you can see from the writing sample, this pen can clearly keep up with faster writing. It's a wet pen, so you would expect it to be able to. As I said, it certainly is wetter than most other Jinhaos that I've encountered. It really can put down a nice amount of ink. As you can clearly see, it is a very, very wet pen, so when you use it on copy paper, just be warned. In terms of line variation, you can squeeze something out of this pen, but you really do have to push down with this pen, and you really don't get that much contrast. So this is the pen with no pressure, and that's as much pressure as I would want to push. Any further would probably just spring the nib. As you can see, there's not that much contrast. In terms of reverse writing, for some reason, no matter what, Western pens just suck with reverse writing, but Chinese pens are usually pretty good, and there's no exception here. Reverse writing is pretty good for this pen. Alright, let's finish this video off with a conclusion. Now, I gotta say, I really do wish I'd bought this pen a long time ago, because I actually had a lot of fun using this pen. While it doesn't have the most exciting nib in the world, it's not a $1,000 flex nib made from gold, I do think these Jinhao number 6 size nibs are very, very good. They're very user-friendly for people who are starting off getting into fountain pens, and they're just great nibs for workhorse fountain pens. They're very, very forgiving on the type of angle that you use them with, and they will write for hours once they get going. And I've got to say, this is a very comfortable pen to hold. I've got to say, for $5, you're not going to get anything that's as heavy as this or as big as this. $5, this is a crazy big pen. And I used to think the Jinhao X450 was big, and it's around about the same money. But going back to the old X450 and X750, these pens just feel tiny compared to this, and they're not as heavy. I think this pen is about 10 grams less than the 159. So if you do want a pen that has, that is big, you should certainly look into getting the Jinhao 159. These pens are just really, really great. And obviously you're not going to be fooling anyone that it's a proper Montblanc pen. Like, come on, it doesn't even have the peaks on it. But if you're getting a 159, I don't think that's the point. You should be getting these pens because you really do want to get into using fountain pens, or because you like using fountain pens. And I think the 159 might even make it onto my top fountain pens from China video. This is a really great pen, and as always, thank you for watching.